I am. We are. This is Norwood. Welcome back to the latest installment of I Am Norwood. I'm pleased to have with me today. Really, the reason that I got involved with Norwood, or one of the key ones to begin with, former councilman and lifelong resident Frank Marino. Councilman Emeritus Marino, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Paul. How are you?
Good, good. How's everything going in your part of town?
That is the number one question you normally ask to start all of our conversations. And as I've always said, as long as Dunkin' Donuts is open and I can get down there for my coffee every afternoon, I'm all set.
You
So
said
everything
Duncan
is
or Derek Cole? We're in Norwood.
ah. Well, I'll tell you what, Derrico probably right now has some of the finest cupcakes in the entire land.
Okay.
There's definitely some calories can be packed
I
on
just
at Derek Cole's.
I just got a dozen for today's travels. But what was I going to say? So you were have you lived here your entire life, or just an overwhelming majority of your life?
The overall majority, I left for college in 1965,
Okay.
the fall of 65, and went to what is now the University of Southern New Hampshire, and graduated from there in 69. And then I wound up working at the college itself in the admissions office. At that point of time, it was still a relatively small college.
Okay.
And
Okay.
what they did is they hired some guys that had just recently graduated. I wound up, my major was marketing and psychology. They hired another guy who was in the IT area and another guy who was in the business administration area. So I was put into admissions. The interesting thing was is that my I was married between my junior and senior year,
Early start.
and in August of I guess it was 68. And my wife and I, after I graduated, my wife and I became dorm parents in a 300 bed woman's dorm in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Wow.
It was like having 300 little sisters running around the house constantly. We had no privacy, none whatsoever. Uh, um, Crying situations at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh
Uh,
no.
I remember we had one young lady. Our door is being banged on in the middle of the night, and one of the residence assistants comes in, all flustered. One of her best friends, who was at the
Mhm.
end of the hallway that we were living on, or floor, had severe pains in her stomach. So I'm a business major. I'm a
Mhm.
football player. I have no idea from what about, especially with a female. So my wife and I go down into the room. There were like five other girls in the room with us. My wife and I are there. So our dean of students,
Mhm.
who lived on the other side of Manchester, his wife is a nurse. So I called, and George picks up the phone. Frank, what's the matter? I said, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to your wife. So he gives his wife the phone, wakes her up, gives her the phone. So she told me, or talked me through an examination for appendicitis
Oh wow.
over the phone. And she said, without her knowing it, take your hand and place it in the crevice of her crotch. And then I want you to press down hard. And if she screams, pick her up and take her to the hospital immediately. We were very fortunate. We had a hospital, Sacred Heart Hospital, where my oldest son was born,
Okay.
was only about 2 blocks away from the dorm that we were in. And off we go, middle of the night. I've got her, it was out of a grade B movie. Middle of the night, I'm walking out of the dormitory carrying the girl in a blanket, putting her into the car, police officer on the corner of the block sees me carrying this girl out and stops all the traffic, the little traffic there is in Manchester, New Hampshire at 2 o'clock in the morning, and gets me up to the hospital. And it turned out that she, in fact, did have appendicitis. So the training that I got at what is now the University of Southern New Hampshire was very unique, to say the
Oh,
least.
wow. Well, before you got up there, you went to school in town, correct? You grew up
Yeah,
here?
I graduated from Norwood Public School.
Tell me
The
about it back then. What was
the
the town and the school like?
when I first started grammar school,
What year was this also?
I think the building that's there now,
Hmm.
I think that was built in 1951, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure it was 1951.
Okay.
And some of the classes were still at the old public school, which was located in the parking lot across the street from the grammar school. And it was one of those traditional 3-story red brick buildings. It was classic, with the wooden floors, the oak wooden floors.
Hmm.
All the stairwells were thick oak wood or granite. Those were the two types of. When you had to go to the bathroom, you had to go all the way into the basement, and it was like very cold and austere. And they even had, if I remember correctly, some of the rooms even had the old-fashioned metal desks that were screwed into the floor with
Okay.
the laptop or the top that would flip back and forth. And
Right,
then we
right.
got the more traditional wooden desks that they brought in. Then
What years were you in public school there?
I guess I started well, I was born in 47, so
Okay.
it must have been 1950, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, probably 51 or thereabouts.
Okay. Tell me about Norwood in the 50s, your wonder
Norwood in the
years.
50s, um, it was High Street, for example,
Hmm.
had no blacktop on it. There was actually many of the streets in town were cinders.
Okay.
The only street that had sidewalks, if I remember correctly, was Broadway. Basically, from Livingston Street
Hmm.
up to Tappan Road. You had Senator Jones's home where they now are developing those new homes,
Right.
and
Some nice amenities I've noticed, by the way, there.
I can't recall the name of the attorney that owned the home directly opposite Senator Jones's, but his wife's family had owned that home almost back to the date of its construction.
Oh, wow.
I think his name was Frank Planner, if I remember correctly. And he was very much involved in politics and that type of thing, more on the county level than Norwood, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Okay.
Then directly opposite, or kitty corner, from Senator Jones's home, was the one mayor that I remember the most from as a child,
Who's
Mayor
that?
Wolf.
Tell me about
Uh,
him. That's a name I haven't heard much yet.
yeah, Bob Wolf, he was a huge man. He had to be 6'3", 6'4".
Hmm.
Uh, I think he was a businessman, if I remember correctly, Republican, as was Senator Jones. And he, if I remember correctly, he had multiple terms
Okay.
as mayor. But back then, the road department,
Hmm.
where there were paved roads, we didn't have a road department other than volunteers on Saturday mornings.
Oh,
They would have a
wow.
crew of guys that would work. I don't know how much they got paid, but they would come out and they would have one dump truck, and they would have these push brooms, and they would sweep the streets of Norwood. They would get all the little pebbles up and all the debris and whatever. And that was our road department.
Wow.
Um, I can't the first head of the road department that I can remember
Hmm.
was my uncle Rocco, Rocco Sisbasi, who
Okay.
was he was a paratrooper during World War II. Um, he there's something about the Shabasi family, which is one of the three or four major families in the history of the town. Um, they love to jump off of buildings. That's why I guess he became a paratrooper. But
Okay.
it was
Okay.
he lived next to us. We lived at 402 High Street,
Right.
and the old Sposa home and it's still there. The two-family home is still there, right next to the left of my parents' home. And they had this huge, huge willow tree. And he used to love to go up and climb the tree. He had no fear of heights,
Huh.
would climb the tree. One day, the limb that he was standing on broke. And God, I don't know how many feet he fell, but wound up wearing a back brace for most of the rest of his life.
Oh, wow.
But he was out jumping on trees again, right? As soon as that back stopped hurting. But he was really the first. I remember he was full time, and there was a
Mhm.
guy by the name of Joe Kober. And Joey lived, the Kober family lived on Livingston Street,
Mhm.
almost directly opposite of where Cousins restaurant is now.
Okay.
So it was really the Bucchinos um, owned two homes coming down High Street to Livingston. Then there was a vacant lot
Mhm.
as a matter of fact, there was an underground stream that ran underneath Livingston Street. And as I only found out when I became a councilman, many of the water problems that we have had over the years on Livingston Street cannot be repaired because the land is so saturated. As a matter of fact,
Oh, wow.
where the home storage building is
Mhm.
on Livingston Street, that used to be a factory many years ago.
What
Don't
kind of
recall
factory?
what don't recall what they made in it, but
Okay.
you had the factory and then a large ditch where the water that was running in the stream underground would come out into this ditch. There was a huge culvert pipe, and the water would run out, and the ditch would run down towards the railroad tracks. And there was a little island that we used to play on. It
Mhm.
was called Skunk Cabbage Island
Ooh, doesn't
because
sound too appealing.
it had all skunk cabbage on it, which were big, huge leaves,
Yeah.
and we would play pirates on the island, and we would hide on the island and that type of thing.
Where's that located so people would have an idea now?
Basically, if you look at where the home storage is right now,
Right.
to the end, you're on Livingston Street looking at it,
Mhm.
and it's to the right of the ditch was to the right of the parking lot, basically where the Christmas tree and the town clock is now.
Okay.
And you just go straight on back. And then in the back area, there's a parking area that's fenced in that the home storage has. And just beyond that parking lot is where the island was located. So you had this little island with the
Yeah.
stream that went around the entire island. Then you had the railroad tracks, which are still there.
Right.
And then the water went underneath the railroad tracks. The stream went underneath the railroad tracks. There was a trestle that was built. And then the water would snake its way down. And many of the problems that we have in the town hall area
Hmm.
and south of where the American Legion Hall is, are all due to the saturation of this area.
Oh, wow.
And the area at the end of South Street is a part of the Hackensack River tributary system.
Oh,
And that's why that has never been developed,
oh,
because
okay.
that area, basically, the southern half of Livingston Street going down to the right, to the light where Blanche Avenue is, without that tributary draining the water out, Norwood and Northvale would be constantly flooded.
Yikes.
So and how I found all this out was that one of the first assignments I had as a councilman was to find out why the water company was constantly draining the reservoir
Okay.
in Harrington Park. And why drain it? And then we have a drought. And people were getting very, very upset about the water restrictions that were being uh, employed during the summer. And it turned out that it was a very, very vital function of the estuary system going down to the Hackensack River, and then the Hackensack River flows into the port of Newark, further down in the Newark area.
So I got school board liaison, and you got to investigate everything environmental going on in the tribute.
Well, I'll tell you
I
what,
guess I got eased in.
when you got involved and I found somebody that would be into that environmental stuff, I had to get you
Well,
on the.
that was what it was. Okay, no.
I'll tell you, you should be commended, really, for the amount of work that you did, really pro bono, uh, for uh, for the community and the environmental commission,
Oh,
uh,
thank you.
with the tree situation and the water, etc. That was quite a we were when that whole thing came up with
The
the
clear cutting,
stripping of the land of the trees up on the East Hill.
right?
We were in a critical situation because the town could have been changed without checking that. The
Hmm.
town would have been changed dramatically with regard to what we have.
Speaking of it, well, I know the East Hill was developed a little later. Was that what was going on there in the 50s? That's a good transitional point.
Uh, the the East Hill, basically, uh, well, in its earliest days, all of the homes, obviously, that you see there now were
Hmm.
not there.
Right.
It was a wooded area. The only buildings that I remember, there was a little bar stand, hot dog stand, right where Demora's is located. To
It
the
was a hot
right,
dog stand. Okay.
to the right of Demora's parking lot, there was a hot dog stand
Hmm.
where you could go in and have a beer, or if you were our age, you had a yoo-hoo. So we would go in. I can remember my Uncle Joe, who eventually became a part of the Norwood Road Department,
Hmm.
was working for DuPont at that point, in Newark. He was a World War II veteran who stepped on a mine.
Oh,
I think he was in the Battle of the Bulge, if I'm not mistaken. And that was, if I'm correct on that, he stepped on a landmine and just shattered his leg.
oh wow.
I can remember as a little kid going to his home, and for years and years in the 50s and in the 60s, he would still have shrapnel and cinders flowing from the leg. He would the life of a veteran. They came back from World War II so mangled,
Right.
as all veterans do. But a number of people from Norwood really got pretty banged up during World War II. He, for one. Um,
That's an
both,
interesting topic. Tell me about some of the other
both.
World War II veterans.
Uh, well, Anthony Cardinelli, former police officer whose father was a special police officer.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember the story correctly, his father was in the Air Corps, and he was on the planes that were flying supplies over the mountains in India, in Tibet,
Okay.
uh, from China into India, India into China. And I think he spent the entire war doing that Burma Road hump, back and forth, air through the air. My father was a CB, and he was a carpenter before World War II began, and
Mm-hmm.
wound up in the construction battalion for the Army. And he basically, the stories that I remember most clearly were the stories of the rebuilding of the airfields. And I'm trying to think of the little island off Japan, the last major battle, the last invasion. I can't think of the name of the island. Help me, Paul, quickly.
We got Okinawa, Iwo Jima.
Okinawa,
There
thank
we
you.
go.
Uh, and basically, he was there when the Japanese came down out of the mountains and had the counterattack. The Japanese pulled
Oh, wow.
away from the lowlands and hid in their infrastructure of mountain passages. And then they launched a counterattack. And if I remember correctly, a general, I can't think of his name now. It was a part of a history lesson that I taught. It was a three-star general, if I remember correctly, was killed on Okinawa in that counterattack by the Japanese. So Carnelli would be one. My father, my
Okay.
uncle, my uncle. I had two uncles that were in the paratroopers. One, Vincent Sabasi.
Mm-hmm.
He lived in Northvale after coming back from the war. But he was in the first flight of paratroopers on D-Day. He went in the
Oh,
night
wow.
before. I'm not quite sure when my uncle Rocco went in, but he also was a paratrooper. A guy by the name of Carlo Conti.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Carlo was one of the most unique men that ever graced the town of Norwood. Um,
Do
he
tell.
he he owned his own. He was an outstanding mechanic
Mm-hmm.
and owned a gas station up in Nyack, New York, that is still there. And basically, I guess he found that he was probably a better mechanic and worker than he was a businessman. So he finally woke up one day and said, "You know what? I'm going to get somebody else to lease this garage, make money so that I make money, and I'm going to go get another job." So he worked for Keon the Keon Concrete Company up in Clarkstown, New York. But Carlo, he there are like five stories I want to tell at the same time. Uh, Carlo Carlo was one of the in Patton's Third Army,
Mm-hmm.
with all the tanks that he had, and there were many. There were only 10 tanks that stayed in the front of the line. And the only way you got off the front of the line is when you had enough points to go home or you
Mm-hmm.
got killed. Patton didn't trust too many people at all. And he had those 10 tanks in front. And Carlo was one of those 10 tank commanders
Wow.
in the front. So he was a crew chief in the one tank. And he often said that he couldn't wait till he died. And as a young guy, I kind of, and someone who admired him completely, I was just shocked. Carlo, why would you say that? He goes, because I want to see George Patton face to face and I want to punch him in the mouth. And I said, why do you want to do that? He goes, because that SOB never let me off the line. He almost got me killed at least 6 times. Some of the stories that he tells about the story of Patton smacking the guy in the hospital,
Uh-huh.
absolutely true. Absolutely true, among other things. And I guess he was quite an eccentric also, because he thought that he was a Carthaginian general
Uh-huh.
from centuries and centuries ago. And when the Third Army went through Africa,
Mhm.
which was the first invasion of by the Americans. He said, we had no idea how to fight. He said, we had never been in a fight like this in our lives. And he goes, and here we are driving through the desert with tanks. And he said that Patton really thought that he was a man of many lives before he became a general in the American Army during World War II. He also believed, and it was amazing. He was as much as he wanted to see Patton again,
Mhm.
as described. He loved the man at the same
Okay.
time, and he was convinced that there was an assassination plot on Patton's life by the CIA and the Russian Secret Service. He to the day that he died, which was just a few years ago, he firmly felt that Patton was eradicated because of his political views and what he thought of the inherent danger of the Russian philosophy
Hmm.
of government.
Wow.
He would have been one of the people that would have volunteered to go to Moscow with a tank without question.
Oh, wow.
But each of these guys that you spoke to, once you they didn't talk about World War II much at all,
Right.
and it was only after some homemade wine from Mr. Pepe in Northvale, or the scrapings of the grappa barrels. Um, I can remember that many, regardless of, and it's such a difference between the climate of our day and the climate of theirs.
Mhm.
While there was very, very differences, a variety of views politically,
Mhm.
Democrat, Republican, pro-war, anti-war, pro atomic energy, anti-atomic energy, et cetera, the civil rights issues, religion, and abortion questions, et cetera. While all those questions were being talked about, there was a camaraderie that these World War II veterans had.
Uh-huh.
And there were times when they knew that they had to put down the sword, so to speak,
Right.
and they were good to one another. But I'll tell you what, when it came time, election time, that month before the election, it was bated breath at times with regard to the battles that would take place between the various political parties.
Well, that's a, I
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
was gonna say that's a good segue. Tell us about the political history of the town from that you recall as concisely as you feel like you can, given what I know you're a wealth of
Uh,
knowledge on this. So,
the political, first off, I think you had to look at the construction of the town.
okay.
Um, and by that, I'm talking about neighborhoods.
Hmm.
Um, the town was, in fact, culturally diverse,
Hmm.
but each of those subgroups within the culture of Norwood had areas that they tended to congregate in, and there were some areas like High Street and Rockland Avenue. I would say High Street and Summit Street
Hmm.
um, were kind of like blended sections where you saw different groups of people. For example, where I live in on High Street, this area between Livingston Street up to Tappan Road, and I would say basically from Rockland to Hudson, maybe slightly beyond Hudson, um, on Summit. That was known as the Patch, and that was basically a lot of Italians lived in, or almost all the Italians lived in that area.
Okay.
Um, High Street towards Broadway tended to be more of the Germans, in particular the Falkenstern family. If you
Okay.
took a look at High Street, you had Pete Oakes, who was a former building inspector, fire chief in town. He owned the only florist in this area back in those days. On the corner of South Street and Livingston Street, where you have those homes on the right, and you make the right-hand turn, you go up towards the grammar school.
Right. Right.
That whole area was owned by Pete Oakes, and he had a florist business there, and then he had another home and a stable for Shetland ponies in Old Tappan. As a matter of fact, in Old Tappan, where they have that outdoor amphitheater or outdoor platform up the street from the high school on the right-hand side.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
That was the Oaks' home
Oh.
also. The house that's there I think, is the original home that was renovated that the town now uses as an office area. So the house was there. In the back, there was a barn where the Shetland ponies were, and where the bandstand is. That was, I think, I remember a glass hothouse to grow flowers. He grew flowers in a hothouse there, and then his retail store was in Norwood, and he had another home where he and the people that he lived with actually lived on a daily basis, and that's where their store was, and it was known as Oaks Florist, and for many years it was the only florist.
Okay.
Then, if you were to go towards Broadway, then
Hmm.
you had the Fimble family. Then I remember the Splain family. And Mr. Splain was very much involved in politics, a staunch Democrat, councilman, and very, very active with us in Little League Baseball. Then next to the Splain home, which was a stone facaded building, even back in those days, you had the Dackerman family, and Mr. Dackerman actually owned a dairy, and I can't remember the name of the dairy, but Norwood had its own dairy, and they would have the big freezers, and the milk would be stored there, and his trucks would go out in the morning, and everybody had a milk box on their back stairway, and the milkman would come, take the old bottles out that have been used, put the new bottles in, and you would get your bill at the end of the week.
Oh, wow.
So that's how you got your milk. There was 7-Eleven wasn't around back in the day, without question. So we had our own dairy. Then
Mhm.
right next to the dairy, where the Chase Bank is,
Mhm.
that was a gas station. And I can remember in the early 1970s, uh, if you knew the guy and it was an old guy who actually lived in the gas station, and he kind of looked like he lived in the gas station too. Can't remember his name, but a very, very nice man. When you first looked at him, you'd be a little nervous, but basically a wonderful human being. If you knew him
Hmm.
and you were a steady customer during the 1970s when we had the gas rationing, during the Nixon administration, and the problems that we had with the Middle East at that point, we were totally dependent on on the Middle East for all of our oil, to drive the car as the heating oil. Uh, but basically, he would whisper in your ear when you went to get your gas, "Come back later. Uh, I'll fill your tank up." And he would give you a time when you had to be there.
Okay.
And you would see, as soon as dark came, you would see people pulling in, turning their lights off. You think you were down in the South and dealing with some moonshiners. It was moonshine gasoline, I guess. But basically, people took care of one another. And if you were a steady customer,
Uh-huh.
and directly across the street where they have the building for the physical therapy, Norwood Physical Therapy, and there's a chiropractor in there. And
Yep, I know what you're
now
talking about. Yep.
that building was, I want to say Hoffman's ice cream shop,
Oh,
uh, but there was actually an ice cream shop. There was like think of an old Western, and
yeah.
you have the wooden deck
Hmm.
leading to a door that was a screen door that was on a wire. It would snap into the door jamb all the time. You would walk in, and there was a bar, a countertop with the little stools that spun around,
Yeah.
and you'd be able to sit there and you would order your ice cream. You could get a sundae, a cone, a sherbet, and it was all Breyer's ice cream. Then directly across the street from there, you had Oscar Beyer's gas station, which is where the BP gas station is now.
Okay.
And he was probably the chief mechanic for the town for many, many years. Uh, he was tremendously involved in the fire department, and all the fire trucks would be fixed there. The few road department trucks we would have would be fixed there. The one town police car would be fixed there. So basically, it was a hub of activity. Plus, he had the best cold Coca-Cola machine in the town. And what we would do is we would go down to Kennedy Field and play baseball all day. And
Hmm.
we just had to be home in time for dinner. So we would be there for lunch, and we never left the baseball field. And but we would always need that Coca-Cola once we got to Oscars. And he was very particular. He didn't want any kids hanging around the gas station because of fear of injury. And he would allow us to buy one Coke, and then he would start to scream at us to get the hell out of my yard. And we would race off. Then
That's
you would go down Livingston Street, and
uh-huh.
where the 7-Eleven is now,
Uh-huh.
we had Mrs. Fricky's Delicatessen. And it was a delicatessen.
Hmm.
And you go in and get your meats and whatever, whatever. But she had the only bakery. There are only two bakeries in the area, the one in Mrs. Fricky's store and
Uh-huh.
one in Harrington Park. So she would make a um, a cake, a crumb cake with cream in between the two pieces of cake. So
Hmm.
she would cook these things in huge trays, and you would have the lower level of the cake. Then she would have, oh, yay much cream. It was delicious.
Oh, wow.
In between, and then but how she would actually slice the top of the cake off and then reposition it without breaking it. And then you would go in and you would buy sections of the crumb cake with cream, and then you would get the old time jelly donuts, with the I think she made the donuts too, if I'm not mistaken, because they were so damn good. It was unbelievable. And I can remember taking a syringe. It was like a baking syringe, and she would load the donuts up with jelly, and then she would roll them over in the granulated sugar. So that was that one. Then after um, after she closed down the store, both she and her husband
When
were
was that?
very old. Excuse me.
When was that they closed?
It had to be in the mid later 50s.
Okay.
And a guy by the name of Joe Caggiano, who was from was a resident of Norwood.
Hmm.
He was a butcher, and I want to say he was a butcher for the A&P company.
Okay.
And he and another guy by the name of Carl, who was I think he was a former police officer in Dumont, and they were friends. And they opened up a small grocery store. So you can go in there. It was like a butcher shop in the back. Carl would run the front of it, which was the grocery store. And if you needed rolls or you needed a pastry, you needed a cereal or candy, it had a greatest selection of candy. On the way to Kennedy Field, that was always a stop because you had to get your bazooka bubblegum to chew to go to Kennedy Field to play baseball all day. Then next, do you know where the shopping center? You've got like a sushi restaurant,
Hmm.
and then a nail spa, and then an empty store right now
Right.
uh, before the big building near the clock. That little store that's empty, that was our post office.
Oh.
It was the second post office I remember. The first post office, the